Welcome to this new video on the Eduqas Anthology. In this video we're going to be talking about the key quotations for each of the poems. There's 18 poems and I've selected 3 quotations for each of those poems, so we're going to be going through 54 quotations in total. First of all, how many quotations should you learn? Well, 3 quotations is enough for a start. It's not everything that you want to mention in the exam, but it's enough to learn the story and the basic ideas, so that's why we're starting with this number. Which quotations should I learn? Well, the quotations need to be spread from throughout the poem so they can help to tell the story, but they also need to refer to the key ideas within the poem, and I've tried to make sure that the quotations that I've selected allow us to discuss those key ideas. How do you learn them quickly? Well, you can't learn a huge amount of information without breaking it down into smaller chunks. So each of these quotations has got a keyword highlighted in red. It's that keyword in red which you want to try and remember, and that should, with practice, allow you to trigger the memory of the full quotation, and therefore remember the full quotation for the real exam. We're going to start off with the poem Hawk Roosting. Okay, in Hawk Roosting, the hawk believes it's almost like an arrogant god that rules the forest. It's its habitat, it's in charge, and nothing can challenge its authority. The first quotation is in sleep, rehearse, perfect kills and eat. It's rehearsing the kill because it's obsessed with the idea of killing. It views it almost like an art form, something to be perfected, something which dominates its thoughts, because it's a predator, that's what it's evolved to do. The second quotation, now I hold creation in my foot. The keyword creation is capitalised. So this refers to the idea of a godly or a biblical creation. The hawk is basically seeing itself as like a god, not a god that gives life, but a god that takes life away. And so that animal that it holds in its foot might be a mouse or something like that, and it's thinking of killing it. So it's almost like it takes pleasure in that power, almost. I'm going to keep things like this. This is the idea of change, or really the absence of change. I'm going to keep things like this. The hawk has got absolute power and control over that forest. Osmondius. The pharaoh Aramis II thought that his creations would last forever, but they crumble over time and they fade away, just like he did, just like his empire did. Nothing lasts forever. I met a traveller from an antique land. The idea of the traveller is that something from the past, something from far away from ancient Egypt, applies to today. So it tells a story, but relates it to the present. The second key quotation, look upon my works, ye mighty in despair. The idea of Ramesses being mighty, his power, his strength was unmatched. He's ruled a huge empire, but he wants the people who look at his statues, at his works, at his creations to despair and feel inadequate compared to his perfection, his arrogance and his power. The poem ends with nothing beside remains. So no matter how many statues he built, no matter how big his empire was, no matter how rich he was, everything disappears over time. It fades into the sand and the desert until there's nothing left but a few crumpled bits. Next poem is Living Space. The poor in India believe that they need God, or they need faith at least, to make it through from day to day, because their lives, their houses are really, really poor, and they struggle to make it through from one day to the next. Nothing is flat or parallel refers to their houses. They are lopsided, they are unplanned, they are built out of scraps. And so it's an idea of poverty, and that their houses can collapse at any time, just like their lives can collapse at any time. Similar, eggs in a wire basket refers to the idea of fragility. These eggs are effectively the people or their lives, and if they're hanging in a wire basket, they could fall and break and smash, just like their lives are very vulnerable at any one time. Hung out over the dark edge of a slanted universe refers to these eggs. It's the next bit of the poem. And the idea that's important here is slanted. If you replace the word universe with world, the idea of it being slanted refers to it being tilted, biased, unfair. It's biased away from the poor and towards the rich. It's basically uneven. London. The poor in London are suffering, and Blake, the writer, is really, really unhappy with this. He wants social change, and he blames the church for being hypocrites and not helping the poor to escape poverty. Marks of weakness, marks of woe. The word marks is important because it's about the impact that poverty has on these poor people. The fact that it could cause physical marks, perhaps, and pain. They might look thin, they might look hungry, they might look really unhappy. Mindforged manacles refers to these invisible chains which trap and tie down the poor. They are literally trapped by poverty. Every blackening church appalls, is important because it brings in the idea of the church that Blake is angry with. He's basically saying that they're not following the teachings of Jesus, and that if Jesus were around, he'd be helping these poor people. But the church is a really rich institution, and he doesn't feel like it's doing enough. This church is black because of, firstly, the Industrial Revolution, but more importantly, he's saying it's stained. It's black with guilt. It's a stain on their conscience, a guilty conscience. Death of a Naturalist refers to the narrator wanting to become a naturalist, same as he knew when he grew up, but as he grew up, he lost his innocence, and he learned a little bit more about the world via the process of discovering reproduction. Warm, thick slobber of frog spawn refers to the idea of, at first, children finding reproduction quite disgusting, and so the word slobber is appropriate for that. The daddy frog was called a bullfrog. The daddy frog, that's using the language of the teacher when he was in school. His teacher, Miss Walls, would use quite simplistic language to teach him. So this is the idea of him discovering and learning at school. And then later on in the poem, when he goes back and he's learned a little bit more about life and he's lost a little bit of innocence, the great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance. He feels guilty at having taken the frog spawn from these frogs because he now knows what he took from them. Afternoons. The narrator doesn't believe in traditional families and thinks people sacrifice too much of their own happiness for their children. Summer is fading, the leaf falling ones and twos. Summer is fading refers to the idea of good times from their past disappearing. Now that they've had children, their lives are not their own. An estate full of washing refers to the amount of domestic chores that the women would have to do, and they feel weighed down by that responsibility, and again they feel trapped. Their lives have become quite boring and mundane. Something is pushing them to the side of their own lives is the last part of the poem, and it's the main message. The something is pushing them to the side, the something is the children, but the side refers to the fact that their lives they feel as though are not their own anymore. In The Soldier, there is a patriotic, ideal soldier, the soldier, who thinks dying for his country is noble and that he's blessed for being English, and dying for his country is something worth dying for. Some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. This idea of the field is because if he dies in a foreign country, he feels as though his English blood, his body, is almost blessing that part and turning that land into English land. A dust whom England bore, shaped and made aware, the dust is referring to a person, himself. And when it's got this idea of whom and bore, it's treating England as a mother, because bore means give birth to, and whom obviously refers to a person. So England is his mother. England is what raised him, so England is what he wants to die for and protect, because he feels grateful for what England has given him. A pulse in the eternal mind refers to this soldier's small part in the wider world. The eternal mind could refer to the mind of God, but also it's referring to what happens after death. He's going to be one small part of a wider sacrifice, and perhaps this was meant to be. This was his time to die. In the Manhunt, the soldier's wife tries to help him cope with his PTSD after he returns home from war. Only then would he let me trace the frozen river which ran through his face. The idea of the frozen river refers to the idea of him being numb and cold. When he comes back from the war, he doesn't know how to react and how to adjust, and so he's numb and his wife is having to gently nurture him. Sweating unexploded mine buried deep in his mind. The idea of a mine is important because if he's got a mine in his head, that mine can be set off by pressure, stress, and so the PTSD which he has can trigger a breakdown or some sort of trauma, and if you apply pressure to a mine, it explodes. Just like if you apply pressure to him, he could metaphorically explode. Then and only then did I come close, is the wife saying, after all of the patience which she shows and after helping him for so long, only then did she come close to understanding what he's gone through, and also to, if you go back to the title, hunting for the man that he used to be, which is why it's called that. Dulce de Coram Est refers to Wilfred Owen's experience in war in World War I and how it taught him that it was not sweet and right to die for your country, so it's the opposite to the soldier. Bent double like old beggars under sacks. This idea of beggars is used because they are vulnerable, they are exploited, and also they're poor, they're suffering. So he feels as though the war is a burden upon them and they're really struggling. He plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning, is him talking about witnessing the death of someone in his unit. And this idea of the choking, it's a very visceral, very evocative, very painful sounding death. And that's why he lists this out almost like the process of dying. The old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, is the whole message of the poem. He calls it a lie. The literal translation for this is that it is not sweet and right to die for your country. Okay, patria refers to the idea of your country, and mori refers to death. So he's saying here that the lie that the poor have been told by the rich to die for their country, he's now realising as he's witnessed death and suffering and complete horror all around him. And this is what has made him realise the true brutality and the horror of war. And this is from towards the end of war, when a lot of people have realised that they've been tricked. Mamet's Wood refers to the poet's journey to the battlefields of Northern Europe, and he looks back at the sacrifices of the Welsh Guards, and it makes him appreciate what they gave up for their country, but also it thinks about how the past can come back to the present, and we need to learn the messages of the past. The wasted young turning up under their plough blades refers to the lives of the soldiers. They are wasted. They died in their teens. They had their whole lives ahead of them, and their future was robbed and taken away by the war. Like a wound working a foreign body to the surface of the skin refers to the remains, the bones of the soldiers working their way up through the soil after the soil is ploughed by the farmers, and a little bit like a splinter or a little bit of grit or gravel in an open wound. It doesn't belong there. It needs bringing out to the surface. Those soldiers didn't belong there, and it's almost like a pain from the past that they are. A broken mosaic of bone linked arm in arm refers to these soldiers dying together. There's a clear sense of brotherhood in this poem, and also in this quotation, linked arm in arm, almost like they died together. But the word mosaic is important because a mosaic has got many different parts. Each one of these soldiers played their own part, and that mosaic, you can only see the true picture when you step back and you see something beautiful. Their sacrifice is beautiful, but he wishes that they never had to do it because their lives are wasted. A wife in London refers to the wife receiving a telegram of her husband's death after he has fallen in the far Southland in South Africa in the Boer War, and just after she receives news of his death, she gets a letter written by his own hand, which was delayed in reaching her. And he wrote about looking forward to coming home, but he's never going to get that. So the poem is split into two parts, with the tragedy of his death and the irony that they will never get to have that future. She sits in the tawny vapour refers to the fog, the smog in London at the time. The vapour is almost trapping her. There's a clear sense of pathetic fallacy here, but it's also a reference to her misery, her sadness. This idea of the vapour being tawny, it's quite dirty, it's brown, London's a polluted time at this time, and it's very difficult for her to see and to see the future, and she's almost trapped by her misery. He has fallen in the far Southland refers to the moment she reads the telegram and discovers his death. So fallen refers to his death. It's a euphemistic way of referring to his death. He hasn't fallen, he's died, he's not fallen over, but it's trying to be almost gentle and cushioning the blow. And you've got the dashes here showing that she's struggling to take it in, she's struggling to process what she's heard. His hand, who the worm now knows, refers to the fact that her husband wrote this letter, but the hand that wrote it is now dead, along with the rest of him. So it's this idea of death and his body being claimed by the earth at the end of the poem. Cozy Up Loggia refers to a woman who realises that true love is not always what it's said to be in fairy tales, and that commitment and contentment is the most important thing. Sometimes a normal sense of happiness is great, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Chainmail glinting to set me free is a metaphor treating her husband, Fred, almost like a knight in shining armour, with his chainmail shining and glinting as he rides to rescue the damsel in distress from the top of the tower. Teenage crushes on worthless boys whose only talent was to kiss you senseless refers to Rita Dove's past. This idea that the men in her life when she was younger were worthless. They weren't interested in her, they were just interested in kissing her. But now she has something real. She has a true connection with Fred. So it's a contrast between a previous worthless relationship and her present relationship, which is very valuable. We're content but fall short of the divine refers to the end of the poem, and how with her husband she's content, she's happy. She's not divine, the capital D referring to godly perfection, but they're content, they're happy. They're not perfect, but being happy is good enough. As imperceptibly as grief is Emily Dickinson charting her her slide into isolation, depression and loneliness, and how that's mirrored by the changing of the seasons and the disappearance of the light. The summer lapsed away at the start of the poem refers to the idea of her happiness and her positivity, and just like seasons fade away, her happiness faded and disappeared as well. A twilight long begun refers to darkness, and again this onset of misery. So the twilight, the darkness, the sadness is going to last for a long time. And she herself was isolated in her room for many years and had very little contact with the outside world. Our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. At the end of the poem, the summer, the happiness, has escaped, has disappeared. So by the end of the poem, despite a brief respite where she enjoyed, a momentary period of happiness, it's a very depressing poem because it says that her happiness by the end of the poem is gone for good. Excerpt from the prelude, the excerpt that's in the Eduqas Anthology, refers to the poet marvelling at the beauty of nature, discovering his joy in the world, realising his place in it, the excitement that he brings, and also growing up a little bit as well, and the excitement that brings as a child, as you begin to lose a little innocence. It was a time of rapture, clear and loud, refers to a sense of discovery, the excitement, the joy that he finds in the world. The pack cloud bellowing and the hunted hare refers to him and his friends out in the Lake District, and the noise, the pack, and the hunted hare. You've got the idea here of natural, almost enjoyment in the natural world, and the games that would be played, almost imitating the sound of the hunt. The orange sky of evening died away. At the end, the orange sky, almost like the feeling of optimism and happiness from youth, just dies away a little as they grow up, and things change as you grow up, which is one of the main ideas in the poem. In Valentine, the poet explores the idea that love isn't always a fairy tale, and actually bitterness and rejection can really affect you quite badly when relationships go wrong. It will blind you with tears refers to the fact that this relationship has gone bad, it's ended in crying, but also that love can be blind, that maybe you didn't see this coming, and maybe it was blinding you to the truth that was there all along. Its fierce kiss will stay on your lips, possessive and faithful. This idea of the onion, which is a metaphor for the love, it clings on, it stays with you, and therefore it affects you, it changes you, because like in the relationship that was perhaps quite possessive and quite bitter and negative, maybe one person was a little bit controlling, that effect, that kiss, lasts, just like the scent of the onion lasts on your lips. Platinum loops shrink to a wedding ring, if you like. The idea of platinum is obviously the symbol of marriage, the symbol of the loop, of eternity, and also of value. But it's being compared to the loops in an onion. So perhaps, money isn't everything. Actually, feelings are more important, but sometimes it's not meant to be. If you like, it's almost half-hearted and unbothered. Maybe she's trying to distance herself from the pain of that relationship. She walks in beauty. The poet admires the grace and poise of a woman he saw at a party whose dark-haired appearance was unusual, it was distinctive, and it caught his attention. In particular, his attention was caught by the way that she walked and the innocence that she had. He compares her beauty to cloudless climes and starry skies. The idea of them being cloudless is just like a cloudless day. The weather is unspoilt. Her beauty is unspoilt and perfect. One shade the more, one ray the less. This is the idea of light and dark, and also the colour in her hair as well. Everything is just perfect. The colour of her hair is perfect. The way that the light hits her eyes is perfect, and he is entranced by this perfect beauty. And a heart whose love is innocent is the end of the poem. He's attracted by the innocence of her. He finds that quite alluring, which is quite relevant because Lord Byron was a bit of a Lothario. He had relationships with many women. So maybe the fact that she's so different to him makes him quite attracted to her. Maybe he wants to corrupt that innocence, or maybe he is changing. He is becoming a new man. But I'll leave that decision up to you. There's definitely two different ways you can interpret this. Is it her innocence? Is it his? I think it's more likely to be hers. But you can debate that in your answer. Into Autumn, the writer explores his admiration for autumn and how it provides growth. It gives us a harvest, a blessing, a bounty, and it's perfectly in harmony, just like music. And also how we almost long for the songs of spring after autumn has ended, because the bleakness of winter will be in between. Fill all fruit with ripeness to the core refers to the idea of autumn working with the sun. It's like bosom friends. They're like close buddies who work in partnership. You know, the idea of photosynthesis, as you'll learn about in science, that brings in the growth in these plants, the growth in the fruits and their crops. And so as summer gives way into autumn, the fruit and the harvest is almost burgeoning. It's bursting at the seams. Okay, there's lots to be gained from it. On a half-reaped furrow, sound asleep almost personifies autumn as a woman asleep in a furrow. And so it's half-reaped, it's in the process of being harvested, and it's this almost like natural image of beauty. The third quotation that's important here: where are the songs of spring? So this is where the writer is longing for this process to begin again with the new life that's brought around in spring, because as autumn finishes and fades away, there's only the cold and death in winter left. And the last poem is Sonnet 43. The poet explores the reasons for loving her partner after falling out with her parents, who disinherited her because they didn't approve of her relationship, and how it will only become stronger and stronger even after death, because it will then become perfect. I love thee to the depth, breadth and height my soul can reach. This idea of almost directions and size, depth, breadth and height, it's saying that her love is infinite because her soul here can reach to an infinite degree. It's not limited by her body, by her physical size. Her soul has infinite reach, and so therefore her love is infinite. The second quotation: I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs. The griefs here refers to the sadness in terms of her being disinherited by her parents, the sadness and pain in her past. And obviously by not approving of her relationship and disinheriting her and almost disowning her, they pushed her even more towards her partner. If God choose, I shall love thee better after death. So this idea of the process of death being the point at which their love becomes unrestricted from mortality, that their love can be perfect because it's infinite, and it's, if God chooses, if God blesses it, that their love will live on forevermore. Okay, that's 3 quotations for each of the 18 poems covered. I suggest that you try and learn as many of those as possible, practice the discussion and the debate and the ideas that I've hinted you towards in this poem, and try and memorise as many as you can. Thanks.